Good to be back. Hello, everyone. For the few of you I haven't met, thank you. Rabbi Fred, one of the many you can't get rid of us old-time rabbis, and thrilled to be back here on a beautiful Shabbat with this beautiful assemblage. Yeah, these aren't very high, are they? They're there. Okay. All right. So, good Shabbos, everyone. And Shana Tova, because we're still early in it, and we know that from how lopsided the Torah is. You can see how little on the one spindle, because we are only at Genesis chapter 6, the second parsha, page 57. Yeah, that's an invitation. Because maybe you don't know this story. See, there was this dude named Noah, and his wife named Mrs. Noah, because our patriarchal tradition didn't bother, but I want to make sure we all remember Na'amah. Na'amah. That's the name Midrash later gives her. So Noah and Na'amah and their kids, and 2 and or 7 of every kind. And if you just need a mnemonic, just think, ya na 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 na, ya na 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 na. Right? Lord said to Noah, there's going to be a floody, get your children out of the muddy, children of the Lord, etc. Right? The animals, they came on by twos. Right? So it's kind of funny that a story that is all about the absolute mass destruction of all life on earth, minus a tiny sliver, is like the go-to story for kids, right? And there's always pastel, rainbow, and ark on the tranquil waters in a baby's nursery. Whoa, what up with that? So it's a story we know well, and from olden times in this community, we would often pass microphones around at the end of an already very long Devar Torah and ask, now what do you think? Based on an interesting question that emerges. But I want to suggest that if this is actually in some ways a dark and dangerous story that also has rainbow and sunshine in it, that this is a time that may feel very dark and despairing, and we are grasping at all the rainbows and sunshine that we can get. And so this time we're going to go in reverse order. I've got some Devar Torah thoughts that maybe I'll share afterwards. But this time you don't need a question. The question is, Noach, 2025, go. Implications for this moment of a story we all know, but layers we haven't yet uncovered.
Hi, Rabbi Fred. I'm Sarah, for those of you who haven't met me. The first thing that actually occurs to me is, why doesn't Noah put up more of a fight? Why is Noah's like, I'm saving my family. I don't need to bother with the rest of the world. And I think maybe there are times in this moment where I feel many of us in different ways are too narrowly focused on what we think of as our community and not the entirety.
Okay, so we're just going to pause and then keep going, right? But look with me at the very, very beginning of the story on page 57. These are the generations of Noah, who was an ish tzaddik, a righteous, and tamim, whole. It can also be translated as simple, right? Simple or whole or upstanding, righteous dude. Haya, he was, bedorotav, in his generation.
In context.
And famously, the Midrash asks, why the superfluous word in his generation? Clearly not in the generation of Abraham Lincoln, right? So you can only be alive in your own generation. Why do we have to qualify it thus? And the answer given is exactly as Sarah's pointing, that this righteous, upstanding dude, there's no record of him saying to his neighbors, you know that funny thing I'm building in the backyard that keeps you up past 9 o'clock when the local zoning ordinance says I shouldn't be pounding and hammering? It's because God is going to destroy us because we're on the wrong path. Repent, people, right? And where's the extra passes for his friends, the Schwartzes and the Greenbaums, to say, like, come on, we've got a little more room on the ark, right? There's nothing. He's just doing as he is told. And it's great, it's necessary, but that may have been what made him righteous in his generation. But the bar of righteousness needs to keep rising, and we need to keep getting higher to clear an ever higher bar. And Abraham will be the model for that, by contrast, next week, to some extent. Okay, so key implication is speak out on behalf of your neighbors when there's a rising tide of lawlessness. What else?
Something that's actually just occurring to me this minute. I usually focus on the environmental piece of flooding, but right now, today, I'm focusing on the rainbow at the end of the story, that, you know, living through a horror of a flood, and we're living through such difficult times, it actually is right this minute giving me some hope that there will be a rainbow, there will be a bird in the sky at the end of the story.
It's a long time on the ark before we see the olive branch, but we hold out that hope for the dove and the rainbow. Nice. Kayla.
Last week, Mirella, Rachel, and I were in Israel. We arrived the night before the hostages were released. When we got up in the morning, the first 7 hostages were in the ambulances being brought out. The entire country was hoping. The entire country was waiting for something good to finally happen. And it was just an incredible experience to be with. We were in one restaurant where we were sitting out on a terrace, and the helicopters went over us because we were near one of the hospitals they were bringing people to. Everybody in the restaurant stood up and applauded as the helicopters went by. If there ever was a time that we need hope for something, some sort of rainbow, it's now, because we kept saying to people, it may not be as bright as you think it is. It was an incredible experience of hope.
Amen. Right? Notice the chair, no longer with talit and photo. So, Baruch Hashem. Thank you. Okay. So many. Go, Ralph.
Yeah. I also see the Torah as kind of also unfolding of our relationship with God, our concept of God. And the early, it's the creation. It's God is very paternalistic. He's going to have this decree. And gradually, we come to phases later in the Torah where it's a little more of a discussion, a little more back and forth, a little more our own consciousness coming out. And so I almost see this as almost a call to us getting more involved in creation and us, with the Torah unfolding, having more responsibility for outcomes.
Nice. There's a move throughout Torah called Nistar Panim, God hiding the divine face, where it used to be all God and almost like a marionette, and we're just doing our thing. And slowly things shift until we no longer even hear God through the prophets, and we have to figure it all out. So early on, there's a midrash that God actually created 974 prototypes of Adam before Genesis chapter 1, right? So God basically destroying and starting over is kind of in the backstory, right? But once there's a world, then we have agency, and we're told it's never going to happen this way again, that God simply destroys. But what about us, right? So get more involved in creation. Beautiful frame. Nice.
So I think the motif of flooding, feeling flooded and escape, is in many ways kind of the metaphor of our times. So many have asked, why don't we do more? Why aren't people, doing more? And I think part of the answer is we feel flooded, and that's intentional. And there's a piece of us, I think, that kind of wants to go the Noach route, right? That kind of just wants to escape a little bit, kind of sit it out and hope, okay, we'll come back when it's, hopefully there'll be a time we can come back and then we'll rebuild. Noach did that because that's what God told him to do. We don't have, at least as far as I know, God to tell us perhaps not to do that, right? Which I think we all somehow internalize is probably not the right way to go about, and yet feeling that internal struggle, I think, in many ways, is sort of the, overriding dilemma of our times.
Nice. So don't let yourself get flooded to the point like the old car, right? When you could keep trying and trying the same thing over and over, and then it certainly won't work because you've literally flooded the engine. If you let too much of this toxic stuff around us seep in, then you're powerless. So don't be flooded and stay. Yeah, thank you. Beautiful.
So I want to bring two issues that stay in my mind for many years. One is there was a program with Bill Moyers about Genesis. It was like 20 years ago, and people from different subjects discussed actually parts of Genesis. One of them was Noah. And I remember that one of them talked about that, first of all, God just wasn't happy with his creation. It was his first experiment, so he started all over. And the other one really hit me was, how could Noah and his family hear all the people drowning and screaming, which I never thought about it. So this is one subject that sits with me all these years, and will sit. The other one is actually, I took classes about the deities and so on in the Middle East, or the Fertile Crescent, and we know that the story of Noah comes actually from the Gilgamesh stories. The thing is that in Gilgamesh stories, the gods decided to destroy the world with a flood because they were upset. They took a nap in the afternoon, and the people annoyed them and woke them up, so they obliterate them. We cooked it differently. God was a just God. And that's when you see how we took a story and cook it in our direction. So I just wanted to bring it up.
Right. This is the classic story for showing the human authorship of Torah. Right, partly because we clearly have the J and the E. That's why we have 2 versus 7 or 40 days versus a year. There's 2 old stories, and they simply splice them, not worrying about consistency, because multiple strands produce this book, including those from the ancient Mesopotamia, for whom the Epic of Gilgamesh was already, a bestseller. So, yeah, nice. Okay. This side, anyone? Oh, all right. Please, Cheryl. Yeah.
Apologies in advance for going so negative, but I just can't get the image out of my head of the sort of reverse Noah story that is playing out in some sense of billionaires planning to fly off to Mars as the humans destroy the earth and make it unlivable, and only the few select are going to survive this, and they're planning for it. And I don't know what that means other than, we need to teach each other to swim.
Wow.
And I'd
Thank
really
you.
like some help in countering that narrative.
Yeah, me too. If you resonate with Cheryl's negativity, please raise your hand. Thought so. A quick aside before Jeff on this. I meant to dedicate this Devar Torah to 2 people, since we're talking about the bummer side of this, right? So one of them, very sadly, in our own community and of a younger generation, many of us from the old days knew as Suzanne Peters, Menucha Peters. She passed away this week. Had been more connected with the Addis community and other spiritual communities recently, but Zichrona Livracha. The other, at least living a full life and leaving no regrets, but my own teacher, we'll hear more about him later, Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who more than anyone in the Jewish world took the Buckminster Fuller image of spaceship Earth and specifically taught around this parsha that the ark is a metaphor for an interdependent whole, right? That everything needs to be renewable. There's no room for 365 days of trash, right? If you can't figure out how food scraps become compost for new food, you're not going to be able to eat for a year on there, right? And if you poison the air underneath where you're there for days on end during storms, then no one can breathe. And so it's the ultimate model of interdependence that's straight from Reb Arthur, Zichrono Livracha. So, yes, we need spaceship Earth ark ethics, and we need to be on this side of it, not flying off to Mars. Yeah.
So the folks going to Mars, in Yiddish you would say Gegensintagkeit. But the thing I really wanted to say, that was a great start for what I was, okay, so also very depressing. In the last 30 to 40 years, we've destroyed 50% of the coral reefs on the planet. 50% are gone now. If we keep doing what we're doing, by 2030 to 2040, we're gonna lose another 20 or 30%. By 2050, who knows? And I don't need to go into all the things that coral reefs provide, but it's really, really sobering. But here's the little rainbow part. It turns out that in places where people have started to manage the water quality and look after these coral reefs, because a coral, many of you may not know this, is actually two organisms. It's an algae and it's a coral. And it's when the algae leaves the coral because of warm water that the coral eventually will lose its food supply and die. But if the water is good, and if the algae comes back, the coral will survive. And there's examples of this around the world, and people are trying to understand genetically why some corals are going to survive this. So there's the little hope that there's a bit of genetic adaptability that maybe we haven't permanently destroyed everything yet.
Thank you. Beautiful. Two more, David and Mirala.
So I like the idea of the two strands pulling together, sort of the Torah modeling e pluribus unum, right? Or unity out of diversity, right? There's two models of how God responds to terrible human behavior, something that you find repulsive and horrifying. One is to say, this is repulsive and horrifying, and I'm going to wipe it out. I'm going to find that little grain of sand that's worth saving and wipe out everything else. Then after the flood and the rainbow story, what the rainbow is about is a covenant. So God's, the second model, they haven't done anything different. They've done the ark thing, they get off, they've burned some meat, and that's it. It doesn't, they haven't repented. But God says, I'm going to try a different model. Let's try a covenant. And so there's promises that go each way. God promises, I'm not going to wipe out the earth, and the people get certain rules, like you're supposed to not murder, and you're supposed to not eat living creatures. There are some expectations that go both ways, but replacing this is horrible, I'm going to wipe it out, with I'm going to talk to the other party and try to create some responsibility going both directions.
Nice. Thank you. And remember in chapter 9 in Noach, when we first hear the word brit, covenant, it is explicitly with all life on earth. It's not even just a human, right? Our circle of compassion and concern and God's perspective reminds us that we are all in it together. So even once they're spread out on the land, that image of the ark and the continual interdependence, it's true. We're just on a larger ark, but it's still limited and finite, and we're in it together. And Mirala.
just to add that Reb Arthur called that the Green Covenant. I'm sure you could talk more about that. Well, the thing that came to mind for me is that when Noah gets the word from God that everything is screwed and you better do something, he immediately takes action. He doesn't argue or say, like, maybe it's not that bad, or maybe it's not going to take that long. Or, I know I'm resisting that feeling like everything needs action right now, forget everything else and focus on this. So just that's what occurred to me.
Here, here. So I love sorry, we're watching the clock. The interplay here of despondency and hope, which reflects this moment, and in many ways reflects the Parsha on its own terms, right? And we need a little bit of both. But thank you for coming back to that it is possible to spring into action when you have a clear sense of how bad things are getting. And again, if he had broadcast that to his neighbors a little bit more, who knows how differently the story might have played out. So, sorry, we have to wrap up here. I'm sorry, Stan. I wanted to just share two things by way of conclusion. One of them is the question of what was the social ill so bad that God felt the need to destroy. This is verse 13, though the world was filled with Hamas. Isn't that interesting, right? Because there's both in Hebrew and in Arabic, cognate languages, the idea of Hamas as some kind of violent lawlessness. And that was, although the organization / terrorist group, Hamas, it's an acronym of 3 different Arabic words. It's an intentional acronym, right? So the world was filled with Hamas, violent lawlessness. But as the commentary says, that's not the cause, that's the symptom. So what's the actual cause? The Midrash loves to explore this, and with Midrash you can be contradictory. So one is exactly as Cheryl said, it was the wealth of people making them all feel that they were islands unto themselves and stopping caring about anyone else, and the licentiousness and evil that was born of everyone for themselves was what ultimately destroyed. The other is much subtler, and it's a reminder for all of us that we who feel we're mostly on the right side of history, but it says someone would bring beans to the marketplace, like to sell, and someone would take, without paying, just under the threshold of what is legally allowable, right? A pruta. That's, it's like a penny or a dime or something. And basically under that, it's not going to count as theft. You shouldn't do it, but you can't be prosecuted for it. So one person figured that out, another person figured that out, and at the bottom of the food chain, it's everyone for themselves until there's nothing left for all of us. And where is it that we, with a penny or a dime rather than a billion, are maybe chipping away a little bit at that collective good? So we need to ask what is it, but more importantly, we need to ask what is the opposite of the Hamas? What was it about Noah that made him the one to survive and this family to carry the future forward? And how do we do even better next time? Because we already know that Noah was only the best of the lot, but not the ideal. And the answer that is given, at least in the Musar literature, this is Reb Eliyahu Dessler, who was in England from the 20s through the 50s. And he says the opposite is chesed. It is abundant loving kindness. Because if the lawless violence is ultimately about everyone for themselves, chesed is about being for each other. And so the family of Noah did amazing chesed on the ark. They kept biodiversity strong, right? Apropos of Jeff's image, right? They were tending the entire future ecosystem, and mythically, we are the lucky beneficiaries of their stewardship. How are we stewarding this collective ark for those who come after us? Is one of the appropriate questions. But even though they were so full of chesed for all that hard work on the ark, he's not called Ish Chesed. He's called Ish Tzaddik, a person of righteousness doing what he must, but Ish Chesed is reserved for Abraham. Because Abraham argues with God around fellow human beings that he doesn't even know from a kingdom that's past his own borders. But will you sweep away the innocent with the wicked? And that is the model of real chesed that we need, a level of loving kindness that goes beyond doing what we have to. So for Noah, it was reactive. This is Rabbi Dessler's teaching. That's why Noah doesn't get the covenant. And we need to wait for Avram and Sarai to emerge as those who will be worthy of this new covenant. We need to be proactive with our chesed. And we need to be working on chesed gemurah, to be not just doing acts of loving kindness, but becoming loving, kind people, making it our essence. Let us cultivate the opposite of Hamas, and let it be chesed. There's more, but another time. Shabbat shalom. Inviting our Gabayim and